You got limits, man. Whoa. Okay, calm down.
As we often see, the Democrats are blaming the Republicans and the Republicans are blaming the Democrats, and no one really wants to do anything right now. But it seems like there's bipartisan blame. So Trump made certain decisions that made this happen. Biden has made certain decisions or not made certain decisions that have exacerbated this. Can you walk us through what the different administrations have done?
I mean, you could go back so many, presidential administrations to talk about deregulation of the railroads and, the focus on shareholders over customers, et cetera. But we've been reporting on a story that really starts with the Obama administration. And the Obama administration in the 2010s, in response to an increasing amount of crude oil being shipped on freight rail, as well as other, hazardous materials. There's been sort of a long-term decline since the 70s in train derailments, but actually an uptick in hazardous material train derailments. So the Obama administration in the early 2010s is sort of watching these high-profile and scary derailments happening and decides it's going to issue some safety rules aimed at making trains carrying hazardous materials safer, with things like speed limits, tank retrofits, an updated braking system, as well as disclosure requirements. So oftentimes towns don't even know what hazardous materials are being carried through them. But at the time, the rules were crafted somewhat narrowly. So at the time, the National Transportation Safety Board, the federal investigative agency that comes in after transportation accidents to say what went wrong, and issue safety recommendations, urged the Obama administration to take a really broad definition of hazardous materials and what constituted a high hazard flammable train. At the same time, the chemical industry, other industries were lobbying the Obama administration to take a very narrow definition. They ended up siding with the corporate lobbyists and adopting the more narrow definition, such that the train that just derailed in East Palestine, which we watched start on fire, we watched, release this mushroom cloud, was not categorized as a high hazard flammable train. Still, the regulations were issued. Then comes the Trump administration, and the administration moves to repeal some of the most robust parts of those safety rules, which was namely a requirement that trains carrying hazardous materials be equipped with electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, which are, an upgrade over the existing Civil War era air braking system that freight trains currently use. And then, Biden shows up. We were all following all of the news coverage of how captured and evil and, corporatist the Trump administration was. So it might seem like a Democratic administration would come in and reinstate the regulations that Trump had slashed and burned. And yet we really haven't seen that with the Biden administration, and in particular, the Department of Transportation.
Is there a relationship between Biden basically intervening to prevent a strike and what just happened?
I think there's undoubtedly a relationship. That's a great question. So the rail union contract negotiations that were happening sort of leading up into last fall were in some ways really fixated on this issue of precision scheduled railroading, which I'd alluded to earlier with the railroads slashing their workforces by nearly 30%. But basically, this is sort of a new management strategy aimed at making trains more efficient, which basically means running them with leaner workforces and at a lower cost. For workers, this has meant trains are understaffed. There are more safety concerns. Inspection times are falling, which is obviously a huge safety issue. Workers can't get paid sick time. They can't get time off. And so these were sort of all issues that were coming up in contract negotiations with the railroad industry. The Biden administration intervened in those contract negotiations to help industry and the unions reach a deal. When some of the unions voted against the contract that the administration had helped negotiate, Congress stepped in and passed a law preventing the rail workers from striking, which of course, sort of the one point of leverage workers have to win a contract is the power to withhold their labor, which was taken up from under them. So some of the safety issues that came up, as well as some of the chronic understaffing issues in those negotiations, absolutely had bearing on what just happened in East Palestine and sort of these larger, very concerning problems in the railroad industry.